Mike Whan, 8th Commissioner of the LPGA. We've done this before. You've been in a leadership role since 2010, and you've done astronomical things. This Women in Tech Challenge Championship happening in Indy, it is potentially a game changer, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. We're excited about playing a big-time event in Indianapolis. We're excited about a $2 million purse. We're definitely excited about 170 countries watching us. But every once in a while, you get to play for something a little bigger than that. When you see all these young women in the front row and talking about STEM and getting involved in science and tech in a big way, when you see that it's changing their lives, I get to see that a lot for golf around the world. I get to see young women around the world that sort of have this passion for golf and they're going to pursue it. But when you meet Dan, you meet the former mayor, and you see what they're doing for women in tech, they're changing lives their own way. So for the LPGA to be part of that, not just to be here, not just play golf, not just be back in the Midwest, where quite frankly I'm from, and we do our best stuff, it's exciting to know this event's going to be about a lot more than just golf.
New sponsors, new partners, new financial investors, as it were, are really important for the lifeblood of the LPGA, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, we don't play without our business partners, and we use the term partners. I always say that sponsors is a bad word because sponsors sounds like you bought something from me. But as my wife would say, partners means we're in this together. And that's the way we want to feel. We understand that Guggenheim is in this with us, and we're in it with them. If this doesn't work for their business, if we don't move the needle for their vision of women in tech, we're not playing here in 7, 8, 9 years. And we don't want to be in business with them for 3 years. We want to be in business with them for 30.
Special piece of this, too, is that sports and economic development, especially in a town like Indianapolis, has always been tourism-related. Awareness mentions what it means. This is business and economic development as it relates to technology, training, urban workforce. How significant is that?
Yeah, this is solving a problem. This is filling a niche long term, and this is Dan and the mayor understanding that if we don't address this now, we're going to have a hole in the workforce in the not too distant future. Now, when you come to us and you talk about, even when you talk about transitional women re-entering the workforce, I got players on tour that are having that discussion. I've got former players on tour that are having that discussion. So when Dan started talking about training to help people re-enter the workforce in a tech environment, I told him, you're not only going to see tour players show up in Indy, you're going to see some of your future prospective clients. They're going to want to go through this same learning. So everything that they said the first time we met struck a chord. And like I said, we're excited to make sure that when we come here, we don't just play a golf tournament, but we send a message.
Well, and again, the important thing, too, is to have a successful multi-year commitment, guaranteed 3 and many more for Indianapolis. But part of the deal also is to create some kind of a national template or national structure relating to women in workforce training and women in tech around the country, maybe, right?
Yeah, I said earlier today, it's neat when you meet somebody who's got a vision bigger than yours. I mean, I think about big-time golf tournaments. I definitely think about helping business partners. But when you meet Dan and he talks about women in tech, Indy is the start. It's not the finish. He views Indy as the lab where he's going to figure this out and he's going to make a difference in this market. He's going to make a difference for young women. And I feel pretty comfortable talking to him. I think you'd agree that his mind is racing to, if I can figure this out, there's other locations, there's other cities, and there's other young women all around the country that we can roll this to. And we both have had a beer or two and said, what if women in tech wasn't a regional thing? What if women in tech wasn't a tournament thing? What if it was across the country? And our goal, I think, between the two of us and certainly between my whole tour, is to bring that vision to life.
Well, and there's certainly an opportunity to do that. Let's talk about the scope of the vision worldwide. Majors won by a variety of women from around the globe. How does the internationalization of the women's tour actually enhance its progress?
Well, if you think about it, it was only maybe 20 years ago when golf, especially women's golf, was made up of golfers from the U.S. and Europe. It was made up of business partners from the U.S. and Europe. As a result, it was televised in U.S. and Europe, and we generally had fans in U.S. and Europe. And so if somebody would have said, you're a stock, what's your upside value? Well, we sort of tapped into our upside value. Now, you jump 20 years later, and we've got players from all over the world. We've got television coverage all over the world. We've got young girls on golf tees with training coaches and programs that they can get into that are happening in virtually every corner of the world. So golf, I've said this many times, especially women's golf, is truly borderless. There's women coming from all over. They're all striving to make it to this tour because when you talk to the best of something in the world, what they want to do is test themselves against the other best. On the LPGA, you got 150 of the best female golfers on the planet teeing it up against each other week in and week out with the whole world watching to find out who's the Rolex world ranking #1 player. And it's really cool for me. Right now, the 5 top players in the world rankings come from 5 different countries.
Interesting dynamic, especially after the Olympics. A lot of pre-Olympic discussion was about the men that didn't come. The women came and had a very successful Olympics from all material respects. How do you build on that?
Well, it's funny. I got asked a lot during Rio. What's the key thing that has to happen here? What's going to be the key impact of these 4 days in Rio? And I've said this many times. The impact of golf in the Olympics happened way before Rio. What happened at Rio almost didn't matter to me because I didn't understand when people used the term Olympic movement. I didn't understand what they meant. But what I've seen over the last 6 or 7 years is when golf became an Olympic sport, there's countries all over the world that invest in Olympic sports. They invest in school programs and training programs, teachers and workout facilities. And right now, if you're a young woman and you want to enter golf, you're going to enter what a lot of countries consider a podium sport, and they invest in podium sports. So they're growing up with school programs and after-school programs and teachers and fitness regimes, all built to create world-class female golfers. None of that existed before the Olympics. So the Olympic movement was all about the movement in putting golf into the Olympics, and what's happened way before we ever teed it up in Rio, and way before we'll ever tee it up again in 4 years in Japan.
Television and women's golf. Television and women's tennis seems to be on the rise continuously. Do you follow kind of the same metrics and platform? Do you do things differently? What's the future of women's golf on TV?
Well, there's a lot of similarities between tennis and golf, meaning that they both become pretty global. Players come from all over the world. They play all over the world. The major difference between us and the WTA is we've made a real commitment to make America, North America, our home. We play 65% of the time here. Players from all over the world move here. We're based here. So when you talk to a player from Korea or Japan or Singapore, Australia, Taiwan, Thailand, they've generally moved here to America to commit to playing on the LPGA. Now, we will travel all over the world. We'll televise all over the world, but we're a little different in the fact that we're not sort of nomadic. This is where we consider home. This is where we play. That's why adding events like Indianapolis are so key. We've had a huge increase in our schedule over the last 5 or 6 years, but overwhelmingly the biggest increase in that schedule have been North American events.
And part of the TV piece is social media today. We can't even ignore that in any context. The number of followers, apparently 4 or 5 times WTA versus LPGA, that's not as important as what you're doing in the future to deal with social media and using it as a platform to expand.
Yeah, I've had a lot of other commissioners and sport leaders kind of critique me because at the LPGA, we don't really push at LPGA as a Twitter handle. We push players' Twitter handles. So if you see the back of a bib at the Indy Women in Tech tournament, you're not going to see at LPGA. You'll see Paula Creamer's handle. You'll see Lexi Thompson's Twitter handle or Facebook post. We want you to follow them because if you're following them, you're following us. And to be honest, they're a lot more interesting than we are. So our following is all about follow our athletes, learn the kind of lifestyle and a commitment to sport they've made, and at the end of the day, you're following the LPGA. So I don't really pay attention to how many people follow the league. I really pay attention to how many people follow our athletes.
Do we need the next female breakout superstar on the LPGA Tour to help expand and grow it, or do we already have that?
Well, it probably depends on where you ask. I always said this many times. Everyone says to me, who's the face of the LPGA? And I always say, well, who's the face of the NFL? See, I have 3 boys, and we grew up all over the country. So if you ask one of my boys, they'd say Tom Brady. If you ask another one of my boys, they'd say Drew Brees. Another one would say Cam Newton. They're all right? Because whoever you follow, if you ask people about the LPGA, they might say Lydia Ko from New Zealand. They might say Lexi Thompson from Florida. They might say Arya Jutanagarn from Thailand. So the really cool thing is, no matter where you're growing up, no matter where you follow, we've got superstars from all those areas. And I think a sport's really at its best when there's a large group of athletes leading it. And I think, anytime a sport gets down to there's one player and where he or she doesn't show up, the event is lessened, that becomes problematic for a league. We're not there right now in the LPGA. We've got 20, 30 athletes that represent 10, 15 different countries that are all at the top of the world rankings.
You personally transitioned from a sports series of sports product companies to running a major professional sports league. Skills that are transferable, skills that are different. How's that transition been?
Well, most people and players would probably tell you the transition is still in progress, but I've always said I've got no background or no experience to be the commissioner of anything. I was the least qualified person for the job. The only time I'm comfortable in this job is when I'm sitting across from somebody who's thinking about writing a significant check every year for the next 5 years to sponsor the LPGA. Because in my background growing up, I've sponsored everything. I haven't run leagues, I haven't done TV deals, I haven't figured out pin placements on the 17th hole, but luckily I have a great team around me that can do that. But what I do know is that when you write a check to a sport, you expect them not just to cash the check, but be committed to your business. So one thing I can tell you, at the LPGA, there is no other more customer-centric group of athletes than us. We want to make sure that this isn't just a good event for us, but Indy's a great event for Guggenheim. And if it's not a good event for Guggenheim, we won't play anymore. And I've said this many times, that I don't see LeBron James finish around and sit in the locker room and talk about the latest sponsor on tour. Yeah. But you will definitely see our athletes, when you interview them afterwards, talk about Guggenheim, they'll talk about women in tech, they'll talk about the race to the CME Globe, they'll talk about the Rolex World Rankings, because they realize that without them, we're at home playing in a member.
Well, and it's interesting because your comments about not being qualified to be a commissioner are humble and, of course, not true. But when you think about the values and traits and expertise that you need to be fluent as a commissioner in your world, what's most important? Marketing, tech, psychology, economics?
Listening. To be honest with you, what you need to realize is that it isn't about what you're looking for. I always have fans that'll email me and say, how come we don't play in Pittsburgh? How come we don't play in Chicago? And I always say it's because I don't go looking for cities. I go looking for business partners. And when I work with a business partner, I ask them, where can we best move the needle for your business? So when I meet Dan from Guggenheim and he says, this is about Indy and building women in tech in Indy, we're playing in Indy. I didn't go looking for Dan because I wanted to find Indy. I wanted to know how we could move the needle for Guggenheim Insurance. And so, for me, what I've learned in this job more than anything else is, if I can understand what's important to my business partner's business, we can figure out how to create a golf tournament to deliver that. If I walk into somebody's office and tell them why they need to be writing a check to golf, no, I haven't met a CEO yet who woke up and drove to work and thought, if I just had a golf tournament, man, everything would be great. And until I meet that person, I have to worry about their business and not mine.
Don't hold your breath meeting that person. You're doing a fantastic job doing this. Finally, what's it like being a guy running a women's organization?
Well, it is funny. I was in a meeting the other day, and it was a presentation I was giving to college, and a person raised their hand and they said, what's the most strange thing about being the LPGA commissioner? I said, in this room right now, there's 60% men and 40% women. I haven't been around this many men in a room in 7 years. And when we break for a bathroom break, I'll wait in line. I haven't waited in line to go to a bathroom in 7 years. So it's very different. But at the end of the day, world-class superstar athletes are world-class superstar athletes. They're focused, they're driven, they're honest, which I love. I mean, when you talk to an athlete, and she either shot 64 today or 74, and there's no median ground, you don't explain that away. So when you're talking to one of my athletes, and I'm talking to people from my sport, I love the fact that it's just straight. It's out there, you tell it like it is, and we can all deal with the truth. So I find sometimes in business, there's ways around the facts. It doesn't happen in sports, and it's one of the best part about my job.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. There you have it. Mike Whan transitioning from bathroom habits to being a world-class commissioner in about 30 seconds. I really appreciate it.